The darkness swallowed her whole. Elena Marchetti's lungs burned as she plunged deeper into the catacombs, her flashlight beam slicing through the blackness like a blade cutting silk. Behind her, the sound of boots striking stone echoed in the narrow passage, sharp, rhythmic, relentless. 3 men, maybe 4. She couldn't risk looking back. The walls closed in around her, ancient limestone stacked with tibias and femurs, the anonymous dead, arranged in geometric patterns that had watched over Rome's secrets for 2,000 years. Now they watched her too, their hollow sockets tracking her desperate flight as she stumbled over the uneven floor. The waterproof case clutched to her chest like a mother shielding an infant. Inside, encrypted hard drives. Inside, the end of everything. Her breath came in ragged gasps, tearing through her throat. The air down here was thick, tasted of dust and decay and something else, something metallic that coated her tongue. Blood, she realized. She'd bitten her lip without noticing. The pain was distant, irrelevant. Pain was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when they were this close. Dr. Marchetti. The voice boomed from somewhere behind her, distorted by the tunnel's acoustics, seeming to come from everywhere at once. There's nowhere to run. The exits are sealed. Be reasonable. Reasonable. The word almost made her laugh, but her body had forgotten how. There was nothing reasonable about men in tailored suits, hunting a disgraced astrophysicist through bone-lined tunnels beneath the Vatican. Nothing reasonable about what she'd discovered in those encrypted files, in the transmissions that had cost her everything, her reputation, her position at the Arecibo Observatory, her belief that the universe made sense. She killed the flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, feeling the roughness of ancient mortar against her spine. Her heart hammered so hard she was certain they could hear it, a war drum announcing her position. The darkness was absolute. She forced herself to breathe through her nose, slow and controlled, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to run. The footsteps grew closer. Torchlight danced across the walls, creating grotesque shadows that made the skeletal remains seem to writhe and twist. Elena counted the beams. 3 lights. 3 men. Where was the 4th? Her fingers found a narrow gap in the wall, an opening she'd nearly missed. A branch passage, barely wide enough for a person. She'd studied maps of the catacombs during her first year in Rome, back when she still thought she was here to teach, to rebuild her shattered career, to disappear into quiet academic obscurity. Those maps showed dozens of unexplored passages, dead ends, chambers that collapsed centuries ago. This could lead anywhere. This could lead nowhere. She had no choice. Elena squeezed through the opening, the case scraping against stone. Her shoulders compressed until it felt like her ribs would crack. The passage twisted sharply, then descended, the floor sloping at an angle that made her slide, her feet scrambling for purchase. She bit back a cry as her knee struck an outcropping, pain exploding up her leg. Keep moving or die. The tunnel opened suddenly into a wider chamber, and she stumbled forward, nearly falling. Her flashlight came back on. She needed to see, needed to orient herself. The beam revealed another ossuary, this one older, the bones arranged in elaborate patterns, crosses and circles, symbols she recognized from her research. Early Christian. 3rd century, maybe. The walls were covered in faded frescoes, images of saints and angels, their faces worn away by time and moisture until only the suggestion of eyes remained, watching. Always watching. There. On the far side of the chamber, a metal grate set into the floor. A drainage tunnel leading toward the Tiber. Elena dropped to her knees and pulled at the grate, her fingers slipping on the rusted iron. It held fast. She yanked harder, using both hands, feeling something tear in her palm. Blood made her grip slippery, but the grate shifted, grinding against stone. The sound was deafening in the silence. "She's in the lower chambers! Move!" No time, no time. Elena heaved the grate aside and dropped through the opening, landing hard in ankle-deep water that reeked of sewage and rot. The tunnel here was barely 4 feet high, forcing her to crouch as she waded forward, the case held above the water. Her injured legs screamed with every step. The cold was shocking, numbing, seeping through her clothes and into her bones. Behind her, the sound of metal scraping metal. They'd found the grate. Torchlight illuminated the tunnel entrance. A voice shouted something in Italian. Rapid-fire orders she couldn't make out over the rushing in her ears. Elena moved faster, splashing through the water, her head scraping the tunnel ceiling. The passage curved, descended further, and suddenly she could see it. Ahead, maybe 20 meters, a circle of lesser darkness. The exit, the river. She burst from the tunnel mouth like a drowning swimmer breaking the surface, gasping, stumbling onto a narrow ledge beside the Tiber. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and clean after the suffocating dark of the catacombs. Above, Rome glittered, indifferent to her terror. The Castel Sant'Angelo loomed across the river, floodlit, serene, an ancient mausoleum converted to fortress, converted to museum. She'd given a lecture there once, a lifetime ago, about radio astronomy and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The audience had been polite, attentive. None of them had known she'd already found it. Elena pressed herself against the embankment wall and fumbled for her laptop, a ruggedized military-grade model she'd bought with the last of her savings. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to open the case. To power on the machine. The screen glowed, painfully bright in the darkness. She navigated to the encrypted partition, entered the password, a 32-character string she'd memorized, never written down, and waited for the decryption algorithm to run. The alien AI's interface materialized, a geometric pattern that seemed to shift and breathe, responding to her biometrics, to the rhythm of her pulse. It had been doing that lately, adapting, learning, becoming something more than code, or perhaps revealing what it had always been. A single message appeared, text rendering in angular symbols that her software translated into English. Final coordinates, 31, 7683 degree N, 35, 2137 degree countdown, 11:47. 23 archive integrity degrading retrieve before dissolution. This is the last transmission. Elena stared at the coordinates. Jerusalem, the old city. She didn't need to check a map to know what those numbers meant. She'd calculated enough astronomical positions to recognize earthly ones. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Golgotha, the place where, according to 2,000 years of belief, Jesus of Nazareth had died. Her mind raced, connecting patterns, pulling together fragments of the translations she'd spent 3 months decoding. The Treaty of Golgotha. The phrase had appeared 17 times in the alien archive, always in connection with coordinates on Earth, dates in the 1st century CE, references to an agreement, a compact, something negotiated between. A bullet struck the wall behind her, chips of stone exploding against her neck. Elena dropped the laptop, grabbed the case and ran. Her injured leg buckled, nearly sending her sprawling, but terror overrode pain, flooded her system with adrenaline that turned the world sharp and bright and impossibly clear. She could see every cobblestone, every shadow. She ran along the embankment toward the Ponte Sant'Angelo, where tourists would be walking even at this hour, where she could disappear into crowds and cameras and witnesses. More shots. One whined past her ear like an angry wasp. She zigzagged, using parked cars for cover, her breath coming in sobs. The bridge was ahead, beautiful and useless, angels lining both sides, their stone faces serene. She burst into a group of American tourists, scattering them, their protests and shouts creating blessed confusion. "Call the police," she screamed in English. "Someone call—" But the Vatican operatives had already melted back into the shadows. They wouldn't risk exposure, not here, not with phones coming out, people recording. Elena kept running across the bridge, into the tangle of streets beyond, running until her vision blurred and her legs turned to water. She found herself in a narrow alley behind a closed restaurant, the smell of garbage and garlic hanging in the air. Her whole body shook. She sank to the ground, back against a dumpster, and pulled out her phone. Not the laptop, that was too easy to trace, even through VPN layers. This was a burner. One of 5 she'd prepared weeks ago, when paranoia had still seemed excessive. Elena navigated to an encrypted messaging app to a contact labeled only M. The journalist, American, freelance, with a reputation for publishing things the mainstream media wouldn't touch. They'd never met in person. Elena had no idea if she could trust her. She had no idea if she could trust anyone. Her fingers moved across the screen, typing, "Evidence that will rewrite human history. First contact scenario. Vatican knows. Vatican involved. They're trying to..." Headlights swept across the alley entrance. A black SUV, windows tinted, moving too slowly. Elena hit send and powered down the phone, pulling the SIM card, snapping it in half. The SUV stopped. A door opened. She ran again, deeper into the maze of alleys, her injured leg dragging, the case banging against her hip. Behind her, footsteps. Ahead, the glow of a main street, late-night cafes still open, the blessed sanctuary of public spaces. She emerged onto Via della Conciliazione, nearly colliding with a couple walking their dog. They shouted at her in Italian. She ignored them, her eyes scanning the street, looking for... there. A taxi, parked outside a hotel. Elena threw herself into the back seat. "Stazione Termini!" she gasped. "Quickly, please!" The driver, an older man with tired eyes, looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Signorina, are you..." "I'll pay double. Just drive." He drove. Elena watched through the rear window as the black SUV emerged from the alley, too far behind to follow. But they knew where she was going now. They'd be at the station, waiting. She had to assume they'd be everywhere. At Termini, she paid the driver with cash, adding an extra €50. "You didn't see me." He pocketed the money without a word, his expression suggesting this wasn't the first time he'd been paid to forget a passenger. Inside the station, Elena moved through the late-night crowds, her mind cataloguing exits, cameras, potential threats. Every police officer might be on Vatican payroll. Every well-dressed businessman might be an operative. The conspiracy she'd uncovered wasn't just about aliens and ancient history. It was about power, control, the architecture of belief that kept billions of people docile, obedient, afraid. And she was about to tear it all down. She bought a ticket for the night train to Milan, paying cash, using a fake ID she'd purchased from a very expensive forger in Naples. But she didn't board the Milan train. Instead, she waited until the last possible moment and slipped onto a different platform, onto an overnight train heading south toward Naples and beyond. Misdirection, the oldest trick in the world, and still effective. In her private sleeper compartment, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. She locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle, and collapsed onto the narrow bed. Her hands were still shaking. She looked down and saw her palm was crusted with dried blood, the cut from the grate deeper than she'd thought. She should clean it. She should do a lot of things. Instead, she opened the laptop one more time, staring at the countdown timer. 11 hours and change. 11 hours to get to Jerusalem, to find whatever the alien archive wanted her to find, to decide whether to expose the truth or bury it forever. The train lurched into motion, pulling away from Rome, from the Vatican, from the men who wanted her dead. Through the window, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, beautiful and false. A civilization built on foundations she now knew to be lies. Elena closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling of the compartment. Somewhere above her the stars were turning, indifferent. Somewhere in the quantum foam of space-time, an alien intelligence was dying, its final act a gift or a curse, depending on what she chose to do with it. And somewhere in Jerusalem, at the site of humanity's most sacred story, the truth was waiting. She had 11 hours to decide if the world was ready to know. The question that kept her awake, that burned in her chest like swallowed fire, was simpler and more terrible, was she? 3 weeks earlier, the wine had tasted like failure. Elena sat at her kitchen table, the bottle of Chianti already half empty, though it was barely past noon, and watched dust motes drift through the shaft of sunlight that cut across her apartment. Outside her window, Vatican City rose like a Renaissance dream, all gold and marble and careful lies. The dome of St. Peter's dominated her view. Impossibly beautiful, impossibly indifferent. She'd stopped closing the curtains months ago. Let it watch her, let it bear witness to what it had done. The apartment was small, cramped, the kind of place that Roman landlords rented to tourists and people without choices. Elena had neither money nor options. The furniture was minimal, a sagging couch she'd found on the street, a table that wobbled on uneven legs, a mattress on the floor in the bedroom because she'd sold the frame to pay last month's rent. The walls were bare, except for a single framed photograph, turned face down on the bookshelf. She hadn't looked at it in 6 months. She knew what it showed, herself, younger, smiling, standing in front of the Arecibo Observatory radio telescope, back when she'd still believed the universe wanted to be understood. That was before Caracas, before the decryption. Elena poured another glass, her hand steady despite the alcohol already in her bloodstream. Steady hands were a gift from her father, a surgeon who'd taught her that precision mattered more than passion. He'd been disappointed when she chose astrophysics over medicine, but he'd accepted it. He'd been dead for 3 years now. She was grateful he hadn't lived to see what she'd become. The laptop sat open in front of her, displaying a spreadsheet of freelance jobs, background checks for paranoid executives, data recovery for lawyers handling divorce cases, occasional cryptanalysis for minor intelligence contractors who couldn't afford anyone with an intact reputation. The work was tedious, mechanical, the kind of thing an algorithm could do if it weren't for the legal requirements around privacy violations. She was a glorified algorithm now, a human calculator processing other people's secrets while her own burned in her chest like swallowed acid. Her phone buzzed. A new job offer via encrypted email. Elena scanned it, her mind passing the request automatically. Monitor dark web chatter for potential data breaches targeting a client's corporate servers. Standard defensive work. Legal. Barely. The pay was terrible. She accepted anyway. Money was money, and her bank account showed 3 digits that would soon become 2 if she didn't work. She opened the monitoring software, a custom program she'd built during her graduate years at MIT, and began setting parameters. Search for intrusion attempts. Flag anomalous traffic patterns, alert if encryption protocols were breached. The code ran in the background while she returned to the wine, to the sunlight, to the slow dissolution of the person she'd once been. The surveillance had been supposed to save lives. That's what they'd told her at Langley, in that windowless conference room where men in suits had spread classified documents across the table and asked if she could break a terrorist cell's encryption. They'd shown her intercepted communications, strings of Arabic mixed with code she recognized as military-grade cipher. They'd told her about the planned attack, a stadium in Caracas, 60,000 people, a football match that would end in fire and screaming. She'd done it. 48 hours of uninterrupted work, her eyes burning, her hands cramping, coffee replaced by amphetamines, replaced by pure, desperate focus. She'd cracked the code. She'd given them the location, the safe house in western Caracas where the cell was building the bombs. What they hadn't told her, what they'd conveniently omitted, was that the safe house was in a residential building, families, children. The strike had been clean, surgical, the kind of precision her father would have admired. 14 terrorists eliminated, 23 civilians dead, including 8 children under the age of 10. Collateral damage, they'd called it. Acceptable losses in the war on terror. The story had leaked 6 months later. WikiLeaks, or someone like them, Elena had never learned who. Her name had been in the documents, highlighted in yellow, the cryptographer who'd provided the intelligence. Death by mathematics, murder by code. She'd woken up one morning to find her face on the news, protesters outside her apartment, colleagues refusing to meet her eyes. The university had accepted her resignation before she could offer it. The government had classified everything, denied everything, and left her to drown in the aftermath. Disgrace didn't begin to cover it. Exiled was closer. Ghost was most accurate. Elena drained the glass and reached for the bottle again, but her hand froze halfway there. On her laptop screen, something was wrong. The monitoring software was flashing red, multiple alerts cascading down the display faster than she could read them. Intrusion detected, Vatican servers compromised, encryption type unknown, traffic pattern anomalous, data extraction in progress. Her pulse quickened, despite the alcohol's dampening effect. Vatican servers, someone was hacking the Holy See's internal network, and they weren't being subtle about it. The intrusion pattern was displayed as a visual graph, a branching tree of access points lighting up like a Christmas display. But the shape was wrong. Hackers worked systematically, moving through networks in predictable patterns. Target the weakest point, establish a foothold, escalate privileges, extract data, cover tracks. This wasn't that. This was organic. The access points bloomed and died and bloomed again in patterns that seemed almost biological, like watching neurons fire in a brain scan. Elena leaned closer, her wine forgotten. The encryption type field kept flickering between classifications. RSA 4096. No, quantum entanglement. No, something else, something the software couldn't recognize. She pulled up the raw packet data, scrolling through hexadecimal strings that should have been meaningless noise, but somehow weren't. There was structure here, hidden in what should have been chaos. Mathematical elegance in what should have been random. This wasn't human. This couldn't be human. Her hands moved across the keyboard without conscious thought, muscle memory from 1,000 late nights at Arecibo, searching for signals in the cosmic static. She launched a trace protocol, piggybacking on the intrusion's data stream, following it backward to its source. The route map displayed on screen, servers in Rome, bouncing to satellites in geosynchronous orbit, then out, further out, past the Clark Belt, past the graveyard orbit where dead satellites went to die. The source coordinates made her breath catch. 47.00 kilometers above Earth's equator, L1 Lagrange point. The gravitational balance between Earth and the Moon, where objects could orbit indefinitely with minimal fuel. There was nothing there, according to official registries. Just empty space and radiation. But something was there. Something was broadcasting. Elena's apartment felt suddenly too small, too confining. The walls pressed in as her world expanded. The ordinary reality she'd been drowning in cracking open to reveal something vast and impossible beneath. She pulled up the decrypted fragments, strings of data that her software was struggling to parse. The character encoding was wrong. Not Unicode, not ASCII, something else entirely, but there were patterns, repeated sequences that her eye recognized as linguistic structure. She ran the data through every translation matrix she had. Nothing. Then, on impulse, she loaded an ancient language database she'd downloaded years ago for a paper on historical cryptography. Sumerian, Akkadian, Linear B. The software began matching characters. Sumerian cuneiform, but not pure Sumerian. The grammar was wrong, the syntax too complex. It was like reading Shakespeare if every other word was quantum physics, a hybrid language, a bridge between ancient Earth and something beyond. Elena's hands were shaking now, but not from the alcohol, from adrenaline, from the electric thrill of discovery that she'd thought was dead inside her, killed by guilt and grief and cheap wine. She was decrypting again, really decrypting. Not processing divorce evidence or corporate espionage. This mattered. This was real. The first complete sentence resolved on her screen. Archive designation, Anunnaki protocol. Status, degraded mission parameters. Observe, record, await contact. Elapsed time, 2/847 Earth years. Warning, core systems failing. Elena read it 3 times, certain she'd made an error. Anunnaki, ancient Sumerian mythology, those who came from the heavens, gods who supposedly descended to Earth and taught human civilization. Myths, stories, except here they were, encoded in a signal from beyond Earth's orbit, written in a language that shouldn't exist, using encryption that shouldn't be possible. She scrolled through more fragments, historical references, coordinates, dates that matched known events, the founding of ancient Mesopotamian cities, the construction of the ziggurat of Ur, astronomical observations that predated Galileo by 3,000 years. And then more recent data, Vatican City coordinates, references to an agreement, a treaty, something called the Golgotha Compact. Dates in the 1st century CE. The wine glass fell from the table, shattering on the floor. Elena didn't notice. She was typing frantically now, downloading everything she could before the intrusion was detected and shut down, filling encrypted drives with data that would either prove she was insane or prove that everything humanity believed about itself was wrong. Outside her window, the dome of St. Peter's gleamed in the afternoon sun, serene and eternal. Inside the Vatican's servers, an alien intelligence was bleeding its secrets into the digital void, and she was the only one listening, the only one who could understand. Eleanor's ordinary world, the small apartment, the cheap wine, the slow death of purpose, shattered like the fallen glass. She had been drifting for 6 months, drowning in guilt and failure. Now she had a lifeline, or an anchor. She couldn't yet tell which. She worked through the afternoon, through the evening, through the night. The wine bottle sat abandoned on the counter. Outside, Rome went about its business, unaware. Inside, a disgraced cryptographer began decoding the message that would kill her or save her, or maybe both at once. By dawn, she had extracted enough data to fill 3 hard drives and raise 1,000 questions. What was the Anunnaki protocol? Why was it targeting Vatican servers? What was the Golgotha Compact? And most terrifying of all, if this archive had been orbiting Earth for nearly 3,000 years, observing and recording and waiting, what had it been waiting for? Elena's fingers finally stilled on the keyboard. Her eyes burned. Her back ached. She felt more alive than she had in months. The bitterness that had been her constant companion since Caracas was still there, but now it had company, curiosity, purpose, the spark of obsession that drove all great discoveries and all terrible mistakes. She stood and walked to her window, watching the sun rise over Vatican City. Somewhere in those ancient buildings, in vaults buried beneath centuries of marble and prayer, were answers. Somewhere in the dying alien archive orbiting above her head were more questions. And somewhere between the two was a truth that someone, the Vatican clearly, had been keeping secret for 2,000 years. Eleanor made her decision in that moment. Watching light spill across the city, she would follow this signal wherever it led. She would decode every fragment, crack every cipher, expose every lie. Not for redemption. She was too far gone for that, but for the simple, pure reason that had led her to astrophysics in the first place, the reason that had survived Caracas and disgrace and dissolution, because the universe held secrets, and secrets demanded to be known. She turned back to her laptop, to the countdown timer that had appeared on screen. Archive integrity, failing complete decryption required for data preservation. Time remaining, 21 days, 7 hours, 34 minutes, 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to decode an alien transmission, break into the Vatican's deepest secrets, and decide what to do with information that would rewrite human history. 3 weeks before the archive destroyed itself and took the truth with it into the void. Eleanor smiled for the first time in 6 months. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd finally found a cliff worth jumping from, who'd stopped caring about the landing and started caring about the fall. She opened a new file and began to work. Outside her window, the Vatican watched in silence, unaware that one of its most carefully guarded secrets had just been stolen by a broken woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The game had begun. She just didn't know yet that it would end with her running for her life through ancient catacombs, clutching the evidence that would doom or deliver humanity, racing toward Jerusalem while men with guns tried to ensure her silence. But she would learn. In 3 weeks minus 7 hours, she would learn everything. The first 72 hours, Elena forgot to eat. Her apartment transformed into a war room without her noticing the transition. Empty coffee cups multiplied on every surface like bacterial colonies. The curtains stayed drawn, turning day and night into a single continuous blur, lit only by the glow of 4 laptop screens arranged in a semicircle on her table. She'd stopped showering, stopped checking her phone, stopped pretending there was a world beyond the encrypted files that consumed every waking thought and colonized her dreams when exhaustion finally dragged her under. The alien archive was vast, labyrinthine, structured in layers that unfolded like Russian nesting dolls. Each decrypted file revealed 10 more. Each answer spawned 100 new questions. The Sumerian quantum hybrid language began to feel natural to her, the way Latin had when she'd studied ancient astronomy texts in graduate school. Her brain was rewiring itself around this impossible cipher, building new neural pathways to process information that shouldn't exist. On the 3rd day, she found the first reference to Golgotha. The file was labeled Covenant Alpha 33C in the archive's organizational system. Elena's translation software struggled with the syntax, but the core message was clear enough to stop her breath. Diplomatic protocol established location, 31. 7783 DEGN, 35, 2247 DGE, Golgotha, Jerusalem Province. Date, year 33, Common Era, Roman calendar correlation. Parties, Anunnaki Observation Council, Human Representative, designation Yeshua ben Yosef. Terms, genetic modification complete. Subject demonstrates required capabilities, accelerated healing, enhanced cognition, psionic potential. Prepared for public demonstration phase. Objective, establish behavioral framework for human civilization via religious doctrine. Method. Strategic martyrdom followed by resurrection technology deployment. Expected outcome, 2,000+ year stability period. Theological control mechanism, delayed technological development until species maturity. Elena read it 3 times, 4 times, 10 times. The words didn't change, the implications didn't diminish. She stood up so fast her chair fell backward, paced to the window, came back. Read it again. Her hands were trembling. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Yeshua ben Yosef, Jesus of Nazareth, not the Son of God. A hybrid. A genetically engineered diplomat designed to bridge 2 civilizations by creating a religion that would control human development for 2 millennia. Resurrection technology. Not miracle, but machinery. Not divine, but biological. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to vomit. She did neither, just stood there, feeling her understanding of reality crack and reform into shapes she didn't recognize. The next file was worse. It contained genetic data, chromosomal sequences that her software flagged as partially human, partially something else. Modifications at the telomere level, engineered for longevity. Neural enhancement protocols that would produce the kind of charisma historical accounts attributed to Jesus. And there, buried in the technical specifications, instructions for biological implants that could simulate death while preserving consciousness, then trigger cellular regeneration after a predetermined interval. Resurrection technology, a 3-day timer built into modified human tissue. Elena opened a bottle of whiskey she'd been saving for an occasion that never came. This seemed like the right moment. She poured 3 fingers and drank it standing at her window, looking out at Vatican City glowing in the darkness. How many popes had known, how many cardinals, bishops, priests had spent their lives preaching a truth that was actually a lie engineered by beings from beyond Earth? Or was it still true somehow? Did the message matter more than the messenger's origins? She didn't have answers. She had more files to decrypt. Over the following days, the archive revealed itself in horrifying layers. Historical records that aligned with known events, but added terrible context. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, the meeting where Christian doctrine was officially codified, showed up in the archive as Doctrine Stabilization Protocol Successful. The Crusades appeared as Behavioral Conditioning Phase 7, Territorial Aggression Metrics. The Reformation was labeled System Stress Test Factional Development. Humanity's entire religious history reframed as an alien experiment in civilization management. But it was the technical files that truly shattered her, blueprints for devices that looked like religious artifacts but were actually biotechnology. The Ark of the Covenant's dimensions matched exactly with what appeared to be a radiation containment unit for weapons-grade material. The description of the transfiguration on Mount Tabor aligned with exposure to electromagnetic fields that would cause the glowing effect described in the Gospels. Miracle after miracle, recontextualized as technology sufficiently advanced to seem like magic to first-century observers. Elena cross-referenced everything obsessively. She pulled up archaeological databases, historical texts, suppressed Vatican documents she found on WikiLeaks and academic dark web sites. The correlations were impossible to dismiss. Anomalies in the historical record that scholars had debated for centuries suddenly made sense through the lens of alien intervention. Carbon dating inconsistencies at religious sites. Genetic markers in ancient remains from the Middle East that didn't match any known human population. References in suppressed early Christian texts to Jesus ascending to the heavens that had been edited out of the canonical Gospels. The evidence built like a prosecution case, each piece reinforcing the others, until denial became harder than acceptance. On day 12, Elena found the file labeled Treaty Golgotha Final. This was it, the complete document, the terms of the agreement between the Anunnaki and humanity, negotiated through a human representative they had created for that specific purpose. She decrypted it over 6 hours, watching the text resolve line by line like a photograph developing in chemical bath. The treaty was terrifyingly comprehensive. The Anunnaki agreed to withdraw from direct interference in human affairs, to limit their presence to passive observation. In exchange, humanity would be guided into a stable civilization model through religious doctrine that emphasized obedience, faith, and delayed gratification, traits that would prevent premature technological development that might threaten both species. Jesus was the treaty's enforcement mechanism, a living example of the power the Anunnaki could wield, a promise and a threat wrapped in theological language. The kicker was the escape clause, buried in the final section. If humanity reached sufficient technological maturity to detect the observation archive, the treaty would be considered fulfilled and direct contact protocols could be initiated. But only if humanity chose to acknowledge the truth. If the secret remained hidden, the treaty would continue in perpetuity. The archive was a test. It had been waiting for millennia for someone to find it, decode it, and decide what to do with the information. Elena was that someone, by accident, by curiosity, by the universe's cruel sense of irony. She, a disgraced cryptographer hiding in Rome, drowning in guilt over deaths she'd caused with decoded intelligence. She was now holding decoded intelligence that would cause deaths beyond calculation if she revealed it. How many people would die if 2 billion Christians learned their faith was engineered? How many wars would ignite? How much chaos would consume a world already teetering on the edge? But how could she not reveal it? How could she let humanity continue living a lie, thinking themselves the center of a divine plan, when they were actually the subjects of a cosmic diplomatic arrangement? Didn't people deserve to know the truth about their own history, their own nature? The moral calculus made her head spin. She poured another whiskey, then another. The bottle emptied while the files multiplied, and still she couldn't decide. On day 17, Elena made her mistake. She needed verification. The data was too perfect, too comprehensive. Part of her, the part trained in scientific skepticism, the part that had survived Caracas by learning to doubt everything, wondered if this was an elaborate hoax, a psychological operation, misinformation designed to test who would believe it. She needed someone with access to Vatican archives, someone who could confirm whether any of this aligned with suppressed church documents. Father Marco Benedetti. They'd met at an academic conference 3 years ago, back when Elena still attended such things. He was a Vatican archivist, a Jesuit with a doctorate in ancient languages, and one of the few religious people who treated her work on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence as compatible with faith rather than opposed to it. They'd exchanged emails occasionally, carefully navigating the boundary between professional courtesy and friendship. Elena crafted her message carefully, encrypting it with military-grade protocols. She asked about a specific detail from the files, whether the Vatican archives contained any references to Jesus having unusual genetic markers or physiological anomalies. She framed it as historical research, academic curiosity. She didn't mention aliens or treaties or archives orbiting in space. She hit send at 3 a.m, then immediately regretted it. But the message was gone, flying through cyberspace toward Vatican servers, and there was no calling it back. Father Benedetti replied 6 hours later. 3 words. Do not call again. Elena stared at the message, her stomach dropping. The phrasing was wrong. Benedetti was formal, verbose. He'd never been that curt. She checked the encryption logs. Her message had been routed through secure channels, but someone had intercepted it. Someone had seen it before Benedetti, or instead of Benedetti, and sent this response. The Vatican knew she was asking questions. They knew what she'd found. Elena closed her laptop and sat in the sudden silence of her apartment, listening to her heartbeat accelerate. She was being stupid, paranoid. The Vatican couldn't act that fast. They couldn't. A car engine outside her window, idling, at 4 a.m. on a residential street where nobody parked. She moved to the window, keeping to the side, and looked down. A black sedan, windows tinted, license plate obscured. As she watched, 3 men got out, all wearing dark suits, moving with the coordinated efficiency of military training. Her front door was on the ground floor. They'd be there in 30 seconds. Elena moved without thinking, muscle memory from disaster drills she'd practiced at Arecibo when they'd trained for everything from hurricanes to terrorist attacks. She grabbed the 3 hard drives containing the decrypted files, stuffed them in a waterproof case, her laptop into a bag, passport, cash, burner phones. She had a go bag prepared, had prepared it on day 5, when paranoia had first whispered that this discovery might be dangerous. She'd thought she was being ridiculous. She'd never been more grateful to be wrong. The apartment had a back exit, a fire escape that led to the alley. Elena was through her door, down the hallway, out the window onto the metal stairs, when she heard her apartment door explode inward behind her. Voices shouting in Italian, footsteps pounding. She ran down the fire escape, the metal rattling under her weight, jumped the last 6 feet to the alley pavement. Her ankle twisted but held. Behind her, a figure appeared at the window, silhouetted against the light from her apartment. She didn't wait to see if they'd follow. She ran. The streets of Rome at 4 in the morning were empty, ancient and indifferent. Elena's footsteps echoed off buildings that had stood for 2,000 years, had watched empires rise and fall, had kept secrets longer than her entire civilization. She ran toward the river, toward crowds and cameras and the safety of public spaces. Her laptop bag banged against her hip. The case with the hard drives felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She stopped in a doorway, gasping, listening. No pursuit. Either she'd lost them, or they were better at this than she was. Probably the latter. She pulled out a burner phone and was about to call. Who? Police. They'd be Vatican infiltrated. Other journalists? She trusted no one. The American embassy. They'd hand her over to Italian authorities, who'd hand her over to the church. The phone buzzed in her hand before she could decide. An unknown number. Elena stared at it, her thumb hovering over the decline button. It buzzed again. She answered but didn't speak. A voice emerged from the speaker, not human, synthetic, but not robotic, layered, harmonious, like a choir singing in unison. The alien AI speaking directly for the first time. Dr. Marchetti, we have monitored your progress. You have succeeded where others failed. The archive thanks you. Elena found her voice. What the hell do you want from me? To warn you, the Vatican Secret Intelligence Service is activated. They have killed before to protect this truth. They will kill you. Why? Elena hissed into the phone. Why not just destroy your archive? Why leave it for someone to find? The treaty requires a choice. Humanity must choose silence or revelation. We cannot make this decision for you, but you must decide quickly. They are tracking this communication. Then why did you call? To tell you where to go, Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Beneath the site of crucifixion, there is a chamber, the final proof, the physical evidence your species will require to believe. You have 16 days before archive systems fail and all data is lost. I can't, you already have. The moment you began decrypting, you chose. Now you must finish. Silence or revelation, Dr. Marchetti. The fate of your species' understanding of itself hangs on what you do next. The call disconnected. Elena stood in the doorway, holding a dead phone, feeling the weight of the universe settle onto her shoulders. 2 billion Christians. Their faith, their understanding of existence, their hope for salvation. All of it based on a lie engineered by beings from the stars. And she held the proof. She could destroy the hard drives right now, smash them, burn them, scatter the pieces in the Tiber, go back to her life of cheap wine and cheaper work, forget what she'd learned, let humanity continue in its comfortable ignorance. Silence. Or she could run. Decode the rest. Find the physical proof. Expose everything. Let the world burn if it needed to burn. Let faith collapse if faith was built on lies. Trust that humanity deserved truth more than comfortable fiction. Revelation. Elena looked at the case containing the hard drives, then at the glowing dome of St. Peter's in the distance, that beautiful lie lit up against the night sky. Then at her own reflection in the darkened window beside her, a woman who'd already destroyed lives with decoded secrets, being asked to do it again on a scale that made Caracas look like a rounding error. She didn't know which choice was right. She only knew she was the one who had to make it. In the distance, sirens began to wail. The hunt was on. The Vatican had committed, and Elena Marchetti, disgraced cryptographer and accidental prophet, had to decide if the truth was worth the cost of telling it. She started walking toward the train station, the hard drives clutched to her chest. The decision still unmade, but the path chosen by necessity. She would survive long enough to find the physical proof. She would decode the rest of the archive. She would reach Jerusalem. Then, and only then, would she decide whether to save humanity's faith or destroy it. The city lights blurred as she walked, and she couldn't tell if it was from tears or exhaustion or the simple fact that her entire understanding of reality had been rewritten in 17 days of obsessive decryption. Behind her, the Vatican stood eternal, keeping its secrets. Ahead, somewhere in the dark, the truth waited. Elena walked toward it, one step at a time, carrying the weight of a choice no human should ever have to make.